Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Paradox of Spiritual Care, a practice on being. I know there are different activities on self-care this evening, and I wanted to record this one so it can be something that you can take with you as you continue to take care of yourself during your year of being a JV. So, before we start, I want to go ahead and take a look at our different self-care practices. On one end, there's the music and poetry, you could say, even painting. You can call it the arts, I guess. I call this expression. By expressive, presses out, right? That's one area. There's the sport and exercise, your different workouts, even yoga, kind of using your body to get it out. I call this embodiment. And then, of course, there's the self-care that is eating a nice meal, maybe, binging some Netflix, even just a nice bath. I call this entitlement, for lack of a better term. I spell it wrong here. I really did mean to put entitlement. In any case, these are the three E's of self-care. So yeah, why then do our practices of self-care typically manifest in these ways? They typically come out as expressive, meaning to, literally to press out, right? What are we pressing out of ourselves? It's often cathartic meaning to simplify or purify, cleanse, even make easy. It's often a releasing of something. Release meaning to stretch, literally to give way, to lease, to go, or just simply active, something that we do, right? Why is self-care something that we do and act on? I don't want to compare or call it some sort of, versus argument, but I think spiritual self-care, if we're talking about the paradox of it, would be the opposite of a lot of these things. Why can't spiritual self-care be something internalizing instead of pressing out? Why not come inside or enter to the earth, as the word literally means, internalize? And instead of simplifying and purifying, why not get a gathering of so many things and bringing it all in, turning into one good thing, like the word gather literally means. And instead of a release, a sort of letting go, why not a drawing, as in drawn, taut almost, to give it some sort of tension? And instead of active doing, why not simply just being, right? These are pretty conceptual, intangible kind of things, moving from one spectrum to the other, and recognizing that spiritual care does involve some sort of opposite movement of what we're used to in the world. But again, that is the spiritual world, and that's kind of what we're working in, right? And it does invite you to be. So, what exactly is spiritual care then? Let's go ahead and explore that in the next couple pages, and then we can maybe do a little practice that you can take with you. So, these are pretty, like I said, intangible questions. I think we have to often get caught up in them, the spiraling of things, but we can look at two things as kind of foundational as we explore spiritual self-practice, right? And what that looks like. I guess it's pretty easy to call it like scriptural and prayer and all that, but I think these two things will help us understand where we're moving through. So, number one, we have to believe that healthy spirituality is going to be a paradox, right? If you look at scripture, it often says, be strong and meek, be hopeful but suffer, love your enemies, blessed are the poor, you are free, but you're also called to listen to God. It's all paradoxical. And two, you have to believe and understand that all of this world is overwhelming. And I underline world because it is the physical world, everything that manifests, everything that's expressed, released and active part of this world is going to be overwhelming. How do we go into that? How do we internalize it? How do we gather it and draw it and simply be in it when it's all overwhelming? Literally over, meaning above you or higher than you, and whelming is to cover, to submerge, or to completely be around you. This is when we turn to self-care, right? When everything is overwhelming, when things don't seem to be going the right way, we go into we figure out our self-care practices. But how often do we go into ourselves? So I'll use the term SSC to describe spiritual self-care, or to abbreviate spiritual self-care. And we have to believe that if our spirituality is paradoxical and this world is above us and covering us and overwhelming all the time, then spiritual self-care is also going to be paradoxical when we are overwhelmed, right? And if overwhelmed means submerged, in spiritual self-care, that calls us to go deeper, right? That's the paradox of it, of being submerged and trying to take care of ourselves spiritually. And if being overwhelmed means we're broken or made small, things are breaking down, that means we have to break more. In the spiritual life, you'd say, light really only gets in through all the cracks, and so you're going to need more cracks to get all that light in. And if we're exhausted, literally drained, as the word means, to drain out, drain completely, spiritual self-care will go, you have to be even more empty. Can you empty yourself even more? And that's a difficult thing to accept and grasp in spiritual self-care, but that is what it's calling you to do. And that's difficult and seems paradoxical to this idea of self-care, but that's exactly where we are and exactly what we're called to do when we talk about spirit, especially in the sense of something Ignatian and Jesuit. I like to use an example of a well. This is not a very good well. As you can tell, it looks more like a stick of dynamite or something. I'm not an artist, so please forgive me. But let's take a well, for example. When it's at its bottom and it's completely empty, let's imagine you're stuck in it, right? You're at the very bottom. It's holding it together. Here we go. It's very much at the bottom and you're there, right? We often find ourselves kind of like stuck. We're like, oh no, what do I need to do? We end up in a hectic search, finding ways to fill it back up. How do I get back to the top? How do I get this full so I can get out of here? And this is a lot of doing, right? This is the expression, the embodiment, the entitlement, and analysis, really, figuring out how to fill this up. And these ways do work. Eventually you'll find a way to be, okay, this is what I need to do to get up there, to, rise up. But spiritual self-care says when the well is dry, sometimes you just have to sit there and kind of wait for rain. This rain is kind of big, and these are really big droplets, but how else will I describe it to you? Yeah. Sometimes you just have to sit there and let the clouds come and know that rain is going to come in. And that means something from the outside is going to fill you up. Something beyond us, beyond our power, beyond our control, will fill us up. And that's spiritual self-care in this example. And you can call that God. You can call that creation, creator. You can call it vibes or virtue, even energy, I think, is a good way of putting it. Any word that you would use to describe those things beyond you. Definitely these are the things that can fill you up, instead of looking to embody it or express it or be entitled to this growth. There's something out there that can fill it up, and that's spiritual self-care. But sitting there demands vulnerability. And this seems to be the opposite of self-care. Self-care often demands or asks of us to be, strong and taken care of. But vulnerability means that we're weak. We're not looking to, band-aid something or solve something, really. We're not doing something to solve. We're really just being attentive to the wound. And that's what vulnerability is. And when we're attentive to it and not avoiding it, sitting in it, we can be cared for spiritually. So what do we do when we're sitting there, right? I think that's where we can really so we're going to do a mind map, which I think is in itself a spiritual practice of self-care. It does really invite you to dwell in things and sit in things. And you might have done this before, but through the lens of practice as spiritual self-care, I think it's a good way to kind of get into the mindset of dwelling, internalizing, gathering, drawing, and simply being. Let's do something simple for me. Sometimes I'm overwhelmed by hunger. What's something on your mind that is overwhelming you? For me right now, just for sake of practice, hunger. And what are some things that are outside of that are kind of just also on my mind? Maybe groceries, maybe, let's see, the taste and, chewing. You could also say, related to hunger, what else is around there? What else can I think of? What else is on my mind? Maybe something like burgers, Burger King, going to McDonald's, the different restaurants I'm thinking of. There's also maybe memories or movies that I think of when I think of hunger. Ratatouille, I think of that scene where, he has that childhood memory eating ratatouille. Maybe you think of table. Who are you sharing this hunger with? Who am I sharing meals with? Who's setting the table? Maybe I think of the feeling of satisfaction of a meal, of satiating my hunger, right? And maybe I think of those who are also hungry, those in poverty who don't have food. This looks messy, right? You have all these different things all around the board, and even these little things can become even more complex as you gather in, as you draw things in, right? Into this spiritual self-care, with hunger as the most, central thing. sometimes you just have to think of what else is attached to it. Bring it all in, right? And you wonder, is it bringing in? Is it pulling out? Does taste, does it do groceries, do the memories, does the table, really invite you to be in that hunger? Does it try to solve it? Does it just say you are hungry, right? So in music, you can think of things as like, is this satisfaction, or is this specific sound, maybe a chorus, a verse, is it a bridge, a build-up, maybe an intro, maybe an instrumental even, is it a minor chord, is it sad, is it happy in the song? And different things can pull and push and be a part of it. Some things can push and pull, and that's the uniqueness of song, right? When you look at music, different parts of the song can really build this whole piece. And in the same way, those things that overwhelm you can feel the same way, right? They can push and pull, and they're all part of this experience that you're having, this thing that's overwhelming you. And they can all lead to other things, even setting the table, or even the idea of chewing when it comes to taste, even the setting of the food and the ingredients, the mise en place, you could say. Does this push and does this pull into your hunger, into this overwhelmingness? In exercise, some people would say, is this like the warm-up? Is it the boring part of a run? Is it just a normal game? Is there competition? Is there the leisure side of recreation? Maybe the championship or the trophy, right? Or the process or the anticipation, the rest, the soreness. All of these things pull in. But as you explore it on a mind map, they invite you to dwell, be in it. In exercise, you might call it the zone if you've seen the movie Soul, right? Let's do something a little more serious. This is me being vulnerable. This is all live and happening right before you. And so I'll try to do this very experience with you in mind mapping as a practice of self-care, to internalize and to gather and to draw and to simply be with you. So let's try again. I think one thing that's really on my mind and overwhelming me at this moment is my conservative Catholic friends. Whenever I think of them, I feel like I have to go into some sort of self-care mode. I have a nice meal and try to not think about them or whatever. I try to go exercise and not think about them. But let's try to take care of this concept spiritually via mind mapping. And then maybe we can go into some reflection. Or definitely, not maybe. We will go into some reflection later on. So as I draw them in and consider them and internalize them and be with them, what other things pop up? Think of the memories I have with them. Did I grow up with them? Do they know my family? Things like that. I think of politics, obviously. What does democracy look like? What's happening in our country? What parties do I align with? What church do I align with? My values in church, and how does that come together? And I think of all the hurt and suffering that I prioritize of others, and how sometimes my friends don't do that. And, I think think of my parents, did they raise me the right way? Did they have a say in who I can become and how I treat others even? I even think of my virtues, right? My values as a young adult. How do I have these conversations, and how do I keep friendships, and do I need to, and do I love them? Who are they hurting? So there's a lot, right? And then I think of how I'm going to raise my kids, maybe. All these different things just kind of pop into my head, and I don't know if you hear my voice, but it's difficult to sit in all this, and it doesn't feel like self-care. I feel like I'm just overwhelming myself even further, and busying my mind, rattling it even more, putting more in there, and that's tough. But this is spiritual self-care. Looking at overwhelms us and going deeper. Looking at whatever makes us broken and breaking it down even more, right? Being exhausted by these things and completely draining it, and emptying everything, putting it all out there, and all these things can have even more to it, right? And, what about my future? What about kids? What about my parents? How are they going to retire? What about suffering? All the different issues, immigration, all these things, all the memories. It's really exhausting, but that's spiritual self-care, right? You're asked to exhaust yourself and empty yourself even more. And so you might ask, how is this self-care? How? This is just making things more difficult. And I have to dig in even deeper. This is not healing at all. In the traditional way, it's not. But in spiritual self-care, if healthy spirituality is paradoxal, in the same way our spiritual self-care is paradoxal too, right? And I want to use the well example again and say that instead of your well being empty, you are the well, right? You're empty. It's not about having a well in your life that you have to fill up, or a glass that you have to fill up. It's about being that vessel, being empty, being someone, a human person that can be filled. And that's how spiritual care needs to work. You need to be a vessel. You need to be emptied. In spirituality, it's easy, I think, to believe and understand that being empty will lead to a type of receptivity, right? You can receive more when you're empty. Literally, it's a receptiveness, and this receptiveness leads to a certain sort of presence. You're here. You realize that you're not carrying other things with you. You're not full of other stuff. You're here, and that allows for deeper listening like obedience, and an ability to do what you need to do and be what you need to be, and be there and listen. And this creates the capacity, a deeper capacity to be filled, right? And that's what the spiritual world is all about. What fills you? What gives you life? What gives you breath? What gives you water? That's really where we're trying to be. It's difficult. It demands a lot of us. But ultimately, that's what creator and creative work asks of us. When you look at the best creations in this earth, they come from somewhere else, and we want to respect that. We want to be a part of that process, but it takes a sort of spiritual emptying, and it takes some sort of spiritual care, right? So if we look at it theologically, if we're talking about spirit and what gives us life and how we reflect on that and how we become more presentable in our self-care, and invite to this greater communion, all these different themes, right? That's my real plug, because I know you're all doing your theological reflection after all that social analysis. And I think there are three theologies you can look at, right? There's Mary, who in the Catholic Church was considered the vessel, right? She carried Jesus, she carried God. And if you believe that, then it took a sort of emptying, and she was taking care of herself spiritually. She emptied herself completely. She exhausted herself completely. She was completely internalizing and gathering and drawing and simply being, and God used her in that way, invited her in that way, communed with her in that way. Literally. Teresa of Avila, she has a great quote that goes, that, kind of respects the indwelling of God, going inside. I say, there's a secret place, a radiant sanctuary, as real as your own kitchen, more real than that, constructed of the purest elements, overflowing with 10,000 beautiful things, worlds within worlds, forests, rivers, velvet coverlets thrown over feather beds, fountains bubbling beneath a canopy of stars, beautiful forests, universal libraries, a wine cellar offering an intoxication so sweet you will never be sober again, a clarity so complete you will never forget. This magnificent refuge is inside of you. Enter. Shatter the darkness that shrouds the doorway. Believe the incredible truth that the beloved has chosen for his dwelling place, the core of your being, because that is the most beautiful place in all of creation. And even further, there's Elizabeth of the Trinity, also a saint in the Catholic Church at least, and she has a sort of theology of just the depth of God and the abyss of God. And I think all these things are part of that spiritual self-care and that reflection as you mind map and dwell and go deep. And it is there in the depths of that the divine impact takes place, where the abyss of our nothingness encounters the abyss of God, the immensity of all that is God. There we will find the strength to die to ourselves, and losing all vestige of self, we will be changed into love. And I think that idea of depth really invites us to love, and that's where we want to take care of ourselves spiritually, to love ourselves and to love the world, right? When we need to be taken care of spiritually so that we can do that. And that's the invitation to collaborate with God, right? I like to use invite to collaborate because that's very googly sound. But therefore, if we're invited to collaborate with that depth, with that dwelling within us, with the most beautiful place within us, with that vessel that we are, our entitlement, our expression, our embodiment becomes even greater, right? Becomes even more meaningful in all that we do. Our expression, our art pieces, when we have this reflection behind us, the spiritual self-care behind it, it becomes more meaningful. All the things, all the exercise and the workouts and the great meals, the nice baths, all these things of self-care become so much more meaningful because we're collaborating with the Creator. We're spiritually, although paradoxically taken care of, we're able to create with the Creator. So I want to leave you with a quote of my own, if that's not narcissistic at all. The spiritual life is more valuable empty. And that sounds so paradoxical to our life. And a lot of people talk about how glass is half empty or half full and all that. And with the social idea that it has to be full, I say it has to be empty so that it can be filled. The vessel's more valuable when it's empty. It's a weird concept and totally against all things capitalism. But that's where we want to be, and that's who we want to be. Right? It invites a sort of entering. It invites a certain gathering, a certain idea of being drawn. Like, you draw water, even. It invites you to just be. You don't have to carry all that water in your glass. You just have to be. You don't have to do anything. So, you're more valuable in that way. And so I ask you to be overwhelmed in your spiritual self-care. Be covered, be submerged, be exhausted, be drained. Be loved. I think an invitation to love does demand that. I offer you 2 prayers. One from Saint Teresa of Calcutta, in the Catholic Church as well, called Stay Where You Are, which to me sounds exactly like indwelling and being and spiritual self-care. And this one goes, stay where you are. Find your own Calcutta. Find the sick, the suffering, and the lonely right where they are. In your home, family's workplace, and in your schools. You can find Calcutta all over if you have the eyes to see wherever you are. You can find the unwanted, unloved, uncared for, just rejected by society, completely forgotten, completely left alone. Stay where you are. And a prayer for the overwhelmed, I will offer as a PDF for you. I hope that you can take it into your reflection and allow yourself to just be you. Allow a God who holds all things and makes things all new. Allow a God who illuminates the darkness. And allow a God whose largeness cares for every single hair on your head. Allow that God. Allow yourself, as you stay where you are, to really work towards and be a part of, be the vessel for, and be the caretaker and the lover of a more just, a more peaceful, and more equitable world. Amen. Thanks, y'all, for being here. I hope this is helpful to you. Please take it with you. Share if you need to. I know this is difficult, but that's what challenge is. It's where you'll grow. So take care.